moving along. Too much coffee and too much travel. So you say you want to manage stormwater. Well, let's talk about how to pay for it. And part of what we do with the Environmental Finance Center is figuring out how to pay. No matter what you do, if you want to buy a new car, take that horrid trip to Disney World, or whatever it is, it's always about the money. So there are creative ways to find money, and there are also efficient ways to spend the money that you already have. So we'll be talking a little bit about how to really reduce costs and increase sustained revenue. And so, blah, blah, blah. So Jen Cotting is my colleague from the University of Maryland Environmental Finance Center. Apparently she's not presenting anymore, she's walking away. And myself will kind of co-present this, and so we'll keep handing back and forth the microphone. Hence my awkward Sonny and Cher reference. All right, so one of the first things comes with education, with public education, reminding people that stormwater matters, that not picking up their dog poo on the corner and letting the snow cover it and make it go away doesn't really make it go away. It makes it a problem for all of us. I start with the poop, because we're ending with lunch, right? So by then you'll forget about the poop. So education is key. Education for you, education with the other folks that work in your communities and live there, certainly. About the EFCs, I mentioned a little bit before, but we work with local communities to help you manage and plan and figure out financing strategies. We certainly do training and technical assistance. That's why we're here today. But we also work one-on-one with communities as well. So consider us a resource paid for by your tax dollars. So this is our presentation outline. There it is. Really, this is from Jen and I think it's funny that it's still here, so that we know who's doing which slides, and we'll still bumble it, I'm sure.
So I know when to steal the microphone from him.
Yeah, or just grab it. So, funding stormwater management. This is the Carrier Dome. If you don't know, then you don't know that apparently now Syracuse University basketball is New York's basketball team. If you say it, it becomes true. It's messaging. And think about messaging in your own communities, but that's a different conversation. But we say we are New York's sports team, so therefore we are. But what we're also doing here is capturing stormwater off of the roof of the Carrier Dome to use it to flush the toilets, flush away all the expensive, cheap beer that the 27,000 people in that building at any given time are expelling, if you will. So what this is doing is creating extra capacity in our sewer system in Syracuse. We have a combined sewer overflow, water, stormwater, and sanitary sewer combined in the same pipe. So if we take the stormwater out and then we use it and replace potable water with the stormwater to flush the toilets, we're creating capacity. And that's a kind of a quick overview, a quick kind of maybe confusing overview of how that really technically works. But it's saving water. It's also saving Syracuse University some money in potable water costs. And frankly, from an ethical perspective, I'm not a very religious guy, but I think it's kind of a sin that we spend money to clean water, to drinking level standards, when people even in our country don't have access to clean water, only to defecate in it. It seems like a sin to me, and a waste of water and money. Anyway, so what's the cost of not funding stormwater? I think Jeff mentioned it earlier. It's really important. What's the cost of being reactive versus proactive? Starting to develop that plan, starting to create an asset inventory and an asset management plan. What's the cost of not talking to your neighbors, or not kind of making that farmer at the top of the hill uncomfortable about the effect that his land use is having on the land use down the hill? This is the cost of not. The cost of flooding on businesses and economic development. After flooding, 1 of every 3 businesses never reopens. In New York State, where the tax burden and everything else is so hard on small businesses, do we need to, as municipalities who need the revenue from businesses, make it even that much harder for businesses to exist and function in our communities? It's not just about your costs, it's about the costs to your community, as well as the benefits, right? If the perception of your community is one that is vulnerable, why would I invest there? And as a business owner or as a resident. And so you want to make that investment on the private sector seem like something that's going to be valuable to that person, right? That's part of your job too, to ensure stable revenue for your community. And so if we can continue with the disaster tourism pictures that we've been showing all day today, this is also the cost of not planning for stormwater. The cost of that pitchfork, $30. The cost of that guy for an hour worth of time to go out there, $30. The cost of the hour of time on the machine that he drove to get out there, quantify that. The gas, quantify that. His boots, quantify that. Seems like small and almost micromanagement, but when you start to quantify all of these things, it's like Kim's example earlier, $15,000 to rebuild that one culvert over the course of several years, $3,500 to rebuild it the right way and not have to go back for several years. So you start quantifying these kinds of costs, and it's not that this guy is too expensive or that we don't value his job, but I bet you there's other things he'd like to do than that, and there's other things in town that maybe you can have him do as well. It's a better use of time and resources. And we look at the $16 billion that Hurricane Irene costs our communities, and we can, kind of hypothetically, esoterically say, well, someone will pay for that. The federal government will bail us out. Really? Have you guys watched CNN lately? I don't have a lot of faith in the federal government bailing us out. So when we look at where we're getting money for these kinds of things, I think we got to first look at ourselves, right? If I need to put a new roof on my house, I look at whether or not I've got the money to do it in my own pocket before I look at credit cards and loans and other things. Why aren't we as communities also thinking that way? Grants last. Let's look at how we can get the revenue and the things at home. It's not easy. I'm not trying to say it is. But if we think along the terms of what do we have now that we can use, and how do we build on that with using outside sources. So more disaster tourism, Binghamton, 2011. Binghamton, poor Binghamton, I mean really, my parents live there. This isn't necessarily their fault, right? I mean, no one thought that putting a city next to a river 200 years ago was a bad idea, necessarily. And it's there, but this flooding is because of what's happening upstream. It's because of what's happening in Whitney Point, in Shenango County, in Otsego County, in Oneonta, well, maybe not Cooperstown, different watershed. But how do they prevent this from happening again? Or be more proactive in ameliorating, attenuating the damage of significant floods by working with the folks upstream, right? We get a significant flood event because of our topography and land use, this will happen again, right? But we can attenuate how severe that damage is by looking upstream. And this is maybe a really broad, large upstream example. But these homes, and again, thinking about outside of Binghamton, the town of Conklin still has homes that are vacant off the tax rolls. It's a blight on the community. It's hurtful to revenue, and it's very hard to recover from. In Syracuse in April of 2011, April 30th, I think we got 2 inches of rain in half an hour. Syracuse is kind of like a bowl. We don't have a river that floods. We do have a lake, but yeah. But we are an impervious bowl because we've paved the whole thing. So when it rains, everything floods downhill. $50 million of damage in 30 minutes, just for the city. And the city of Syracuse, which 2 years ago threatened bankruptcy. So can we afford to not be more proactive about that? I could talk for 2 hours about how we're being proactive now with Onondaga County and the Save the Rain program, but that's not why I'm here today. This doesn't even talk about some private costs, like the cost of little old me when I was coming back from Auburn and had no idea this was happening. And I was trying to get off here, pretend that white car is me, though it's not. I was behind a BMW sports car, and of course, he probably had the self-confidence that most people who drive BMWs do to go through the flood. And I'm like, well, if that guy can go through with a BMW, I'll be okay with my 2000 Saturn. Well, I wasn't. The water went up over the hood of my car, the adrenaline went, I made it, but I hit something, some asphalt or something that was, so it did $250 worth of damage to my car. Small beans, right? But how many other people had $250 worth of damage from this 30 minutes of rain? How do we quantify that? And how do we kind of measure the annoyance? And when does that annoyance become enough for me to move somewhere else? So, where does the water go? There are simple things that we can do. This is some examples of green infrastructure. Site design, ordinances, codes. We have this stuff written already. It's modeled in communities just like yours. City of Binghamton, I have to applaud, has a much more strict stormwater ordinance than the state requires. Putting in areas to catch the water off of immediately off the parking lot, on-site stormwater management. The additional cost here is negligible compared to the cost that the community will have to bear during another storm event. And the beautification, the other ancillary benefits here are nice. And so this, parking lots are ugly. They're designed to be ugly. Why do they have to be ugly? They don't. And when we put planters in the middle of them, we curb those planters up. We push the water away from the vegetated areas. If we allow the water to go into the vegetated areas and infiltrate in, that vegetated area serves two purposes now. It's attractive and it's a stormwater infiltration basin, right? A parking lot's just a parking lot. Poor tax revenue off of parking lots too, because it's not the highest and best use. But if we also make it a stormwater capture or stormwater retention or infiltration a piece of property, right? So now it's parking and it's stormwater management. It's serving two functions. That's a higher and better use than just parking. And so going back to the idea of green infrastructure, of capturing water where it falls, this is a rain garden that day in Syracuse in 2011 doing its job. Capturing water. Seems incremental, seems like not a lot, but if we did incremental little measures like this across different sites, it has a cumulative effect, right? Talking about briefly some of the benefits of a green infrastructure approach, if you will. And so rain gardens, rain barrels, porous pavement, bioswales, these kinds of things we term green infrastructure. It's greater than the stormwater management. In an urban environment, it's improved streetscapes. It's increased capacity in our piped infrastructure. And we're noticing areas where you're seeing increased value, economic value, business value, retail value, quality of life value of having these kinds of things designed in an urban and suburban landscape. And it's easier to fund them because if you put a rain garden in a park, the DPW budget can be affected by that rain garden, and so can the Parks Department, right? It can be kind of co-funded interdepartmentally. And I'm not making it sound like that's just totally easy and let's just go write the check now. But it's another innovative way to begin to think about how do we fund something. Stormwater is DPW, but when stormwater becomes DPW and parks, then there's a different take, there's a different flavor, and there's different ways to fund that project. So I'm going to show you a couple of urban examples, recognizing most of you are not urban, but to give you a flavor for the green infrastructure idea that's happening in urban centers like Binghamton, like Syracuse. So this is a parking lot. We love our parking lots in upstate. In fact, in the 60s, we've torn down most of our buildings to build parking lots so we can all move out into the suburbs and drive into the urban areas. And part of that is why we're talking here today about stormwater, because we didn't think about it then. And so this is a nice, attractive parking lot. Not really attractive. This is more attractive. These vegetated swales between the parking lanes allow water to infiltrate into the ground and disperse under the impervious asphalt parking lot. So this becomes essentially a big infiltration basin underneath this parking lot. It serves two purposes now, and it's a little more attractive with the vegetation. And in Syracuse and other places in upstate where we don't get a lot of improvement because we just throw more cold pack onto a pothole and hope that it stays there until next season, this parking lot, the longevity of this parking lot's now going to be a little bit longer than it was before. This is just another example of different ways to do it. You don't have to, if you use porous pavement, you don't have to use porous pavement for the whole parking lot to get the water from the whole parking lot. You can just do the parking stalls around the outside, and you capture all of the water off of the whole area. This helps to kind of reduce the cost, the overall cost, so that you don't have to use porous over everything. And this relatively small parking lot captures 700,000 gallons of stormwater a year annually. Again, maybe that sounds like small beans, but in Syracuse we have to capture 250 million gallons of stormwater a year using green infrastructure. And so this gets us incrementally to that space. While we're building new parking lots, let's think ahead and be proactive, using LED lighting instead of the good old sodium halide that create more heat than they do usable light. That doesn't sound efficient at all. Maybe LEDs are a little more expensive today, but if you do the cost-benefit analysis and you look at the lifetime, you're paying that off relatively quickly. And electric car charging stations. They may not be right for your community, and they're not right for Syracuse right now, but in 10 years they will be. I already know 2 people who have plug-ins. And so having this infrastructure in place and ready to go, in again, a proactive way, made sense for Syracuse when they were redoing these parking lots. This is a village in Rockland County. They got Green Innovation Grant Program funding. This is state funding that should be available soon. In the next couple of weeks, the CFA is going to likely be released. There'll be about $15 million of Green Innovation Grant Program funding available. This is available to all of your communities, soil and water conservation districts. Most people I think anybody can apply except for an individual. The money that Syracuse University used to to capture water off the carrier dome was Green Innovation Grant Program money, as an example. So this was Green Innovation Grant Program. This is the village of Greenwood Lake. This is the after. So you notice that what they did is they put in a vegetated boulevard essentially between their 2 travel lanes and porous paving in the parking areas. These porous pavers are kind of a visual denotation between the travel lane and the parking lane. These days, with distracted or partially blind drivers, depending on whether you're 16 and texting or 60 and refuse to wear your glasses, helps to let people know when they're driving out of the peripheral of their eye that maybe they should stay out of the differently colored pavement, right? But it also allows for just more clear parking lanes. And you also know notice they have curb cuts here to allow the water to flow along the curb and drain into the infiltration basin. Managing the stormwater on site instead of running it off down the road. This is the before. So just from an aesthetic perspective, and of course the angles are different, after, before, that's kind of cute. Nah. So this is the same angle again. So we see the before and the after, and managing all the stormwater from the entire site using green infrastructure. And this is some of the existing conditions, as the engineers say. A lot of flooding where they were leaving a lot of their DPW materials. And this is the site that they turned into porous paver parking lot. And the gravel that you see here is being spread between the pavers to hold them open and allow the infiltration between. So just a couple more pictures. So this was funded by New York State. 90% grant, 10% local match. This is Syracuse. We do a really good job of taking the before pictures when it's gray and rainy, and the after pictures when it's sunny and vegetated. It's like the proactive commercials you see at midnight, right? So you see all of the porous, impervious areas that the water has nowhere to go except for down the drain or into someone's basement. So here, putting in porous pavers, again, creating a visual of difference between driving lane, parking lane, and just more aesthetically pleasing as well. The water goes off this asphalt into the porous areas and infiltrates below. Same thing with the vegetated swales on either side. Also thinking ahead and knowing that there are new ADA, American Disability Act requirements, making shorter crosswalks at the corners. This is our beautiful city hall. And this is the Erie Canal Museum, where we built a green roof on top of it, too, to manage some stormwater on the world's oldest existing Waylock building. Come check it out. All right, so this is not a good source of funding. This is called what we call spam. So if you receive it, disregard it. That guy from Nigeria, he's not really your uncle, and he doesn't really need you to store money for him. This guy, remember him from the 80s? Apparently, he lives down the street from Jen. Also not a good use of funding. And so this is where I stop talking and Jen starts.
You were wondering if I was ever going to get this microphone, weren't you?
So were you.
I know
So
you
were
were.
you.
This morning when I said you were the star of the show and I was just window dressing, I was kidding. Okay, so funding versus financing. Let's talk about this for a second. And don't worry, don't be alarmed. I'm not going to go into a lot of financial mumbo jumbo. My eyes would glaze over and my head would hit the table faster than yours would. But I do want to point out that when the environmental finance centers talk about funding versus financing, they do not use those terms interchangeably the way a lot of folks do. And that's simply because we view those two things very differently. We see funding as something that's a finite amount of money. That's a grant. That's a one-time investment. And not that there's anything wrong with that. Believe me, it's grant money that keeps the lights on at my house. We're 100% grant funded at my center. So there's a really important role for grants in your financing strategy. But when we talk about financing, we're talking about how do you leverage that grant money, how do you develop other alternative funding streams, how do you pull from a bunch of different places to put an overall financing strategy together that's going to last you into the long term. And obviously, finally, we're hoping for the greatest return on the investment that you're making possible. And why does financing matter? I mean, I think we've had enough of a discussion today about capacity issues and funding, limited resources. So I don't think I need to sell you on this idea, but I may need to sell you on the idea that grants are going to solve everything. And I would beg to differ, but we can argue about that in a minute. So why does financing matter? It provides the foundation and the skeleton for whatever plan you're trying to implement. In terms of your green infrastructure plan, your resiliency plan, your flood management plan. Having a plan is great, but your plan is no better than a boneless chicken at the boneless chicken ranch, because if it doesn't have that financing strategy to hold it up, it's not going to get very far. Over the course of the work that Chris and I have done with communities, we do a lot of one-on-one and technical assistance at the community level. And we've noticed a few things that have floated to the surface that seem to be common to the communities that are able to develop a really successful long-term financing plan. First and foremost, those plans have to be community-based. I know a lot of you in this room have stormwater permits, have some regulatory drivers that are behind why you're doing some of the things you're doing. Mother Nature can be a really powerful driver as well. We've seen some pretty compelling photos today. But the solution that is implemented ultimately, both in terms of from a resource management perspective, but also from a financing perspective, that has to be community driven. That has to be the result of a community coming together and deciding what makes sense in the context of your locality. Second of all, the most successful financing strategies tend to be integrated. It's not relying on any one particular source of funding, not any one grant. Even if you're relying heavily on grants, that's fine. Make sure they're coming from different places, because as funding priorities change and public resources start to dry up, as many of you have described already today in the breakout groups, you start to feel the pinch. And if your implementation plan is relying on any one particular source of funding, and that source of funding goes away, you're dead in the water. And then finally, and we see this to be particularly appropriate for green infrastructure and resiliency approaches that are sort of take a step back and try and look at things holistically. We tend to find that the really successful financing strategies mirror the resource. I didn't move, I swear to God I didn't move. Okay. That startled me, sorry. So they tend to mirror the resource. And when I say mirror the resource, I simply mean that all of the different land use types are being considered, all of the different property owners are being considered. so that you have everyone at the table. Everyone who's part of the problem is part of the solution and part of the financing that supports the solution. So there are a couple different categories of financing mechanisms. We always like to start with the cost reducers. We want to get that cost down as much as possible, create as much efficiency as we possibly can, because then you don't have such a big burden on the revenue side. So we'll talk a little bit about cost reducers, some revenue generators, and then some market-based approaches. Chris has some really great examples of market-based approaches going on in the region. When we talk about cost-reducing strategies, we usually talk about things like planning. Planning may not sound like a financing mechanism, but having a plan that guides implementation makes sure, and especially when it's this community-supported, consensus-driven plan, it ensures that whatever limited resources you do have to invest on the ground are only being devoted to things that the community has agreed are a priority, and they're not being squandered. The EPA has done a lot of work in the city of Lancaster, in the region that I work in Pennsylvania, and actually took a look at the approach that the city has taken with their green infrastructure plan, and they determined that they're experiencing a cost savings of up to 45% by operating with a plan rather than doing ad hoc green infrastructure projects when they can get a grant here and there. So having a plan for over time, how you're going to install all of your practices and how you're going to maintain them over time, can be really important for creating efficiencies and making sure that you are being cost effective. Effective and enforced policies. Policy can be an important cost-reducing tool as well, because policy is what determines which impacts can happen to the land, where they can happen, how they can happen, to what extent they can happen. And Chris has a few good examples of those that I'll tell you about in a minute when he steals the microphone back from me. Coordinating with other community priorities. Chris touched on that pretty well in some earlier slides. Can we be addressing stormwater and public safety and traffic calming all at the same time? Asset management, which I'll talk a little bit about, but you know, we had both Kim and Jeff this morning hit on the value of asset management, but we'll talk about that a little bit too. And then collaboration, which I heard come out of almost every single breakout group today, that being able to collaborate is a really important tool. It's an opportunity to tap into the capacities of your neighbors, of some of the nonprofit communities, maybe the academic institutions in the area, reduce the burden to your municipality. I told you he was going to steal it right back.
That was an abrupt transition. So I want to talk about a couple of policy tools briefly that could be helpful to you. And nobody likes the idea of a new fee, certainly not a new tax. But the state a couple of years ago created what they call a Watershed Improvement District. You can do this at the municipal level. You can create special districts. You can work with neighboring communities, even at the county level, to essentially charge a fee to a special district. However you would value that, would be up to you. But the goal is water quality. And so take the example of Skinny Atlas Lake, maybe, Syracuse's drinking water source, where we have a lot of failing septics on cottages that are affecting water quality. No one wants to pay for, as a private landowner, nobody wants to pay for the replacement of a septic when they built a cottage on a steep slope right on bedrock. But who is invested in that is Syracuse, the city of Syracuse, because it's our drinking water. If we created, and we have no plans to, but if the city of Syracuse created a watershed improvement district and charged everybody a fee, we could use that money to replace his leaky septic tank for the greater good. We could also use it to install green infrastructure and other stormwater management practices on public and private property. So the value is spread out, and everybody sees that value. Everybody pays and everybody sees the value. Cazenovia Lake is another example where failing septics are creating algal blooms, and those algal blooms are making folks like me not want to go swimming there. And then if I don't go swimming there, then I don't stop there to get gas and have lunch and all those other things that contribute to local revenue. So they're thinking about creating something like this to help subsidize the replacement of septic tanks to improve water quality. So something to think about. I think it's a good idea. It's fairly new in the state as far as a tool that you can use. The New York Public Infrastructure Policy Act, this is something that you pretty much have to adhere to when you are applying for grants through the consolidated funding application. This is essentially saying, fix it first. If you're going to build, we hope that you're also rebuilding. We're not interested in putting drinking water systems out into farm fields anymore to incentivize development. Look at where you are and what you have now, and let's improve upon that. Essentially smart growth principles. And they apply to just about any project that you could come up with. So this is thinking a little bit outside of the box, like how can we find funding, how can we find policy or create policies or use existing policies that further the goals of stormwater. The Complete Streets Act, the Safe Routes to School program, these are ways to reinvest in existing infrastructure, and you can build that infrastructure in a way that better manages stormwater. And these are examples of areas where complete streets are working in western New York, a little bit further from here because the last time I gave this presentation I was further west than here. But complete streets, ADA accessibility, sidewalks, roads, bikes, stormwater. And new water and wastewater. If you can dig up the road, let's do all the other utilities if you have them. So asset management is something that Jen's going to talk about, but I cannot underscore enough how important asset management is and how many resources there are out there, including the EFCs, when it comes to asset management.
Thanks. Yes, I will probably need that as well. So I don't know how much I really need to touch on asset management because I think Jeff really hammered this point home earlier, and appropriately so. It's a great way. You really need to understand your existing system. And when we say system at least from our EFC's perspective, we're talking about not just your hard infrastructure, not just pipes and culverts, but also your green infrastructure, your bioswales and your ditches and the whole system. Because just because it's green infrastructure doesn't mean you can treat it any differently than your gray infrastructure. You still have to plan for it and maintain it and pay for it. So understanding exactly what your system looks like, what the condition of that system is, and having a plan for how you're going to maintain that system over time, how you're going to repair that system over time. I think Kim's example really highlighted the value of not having blowout and repair and blowout and repair and blowout and repair. It's just not financially efficient. Making sure that you're maintaining these systems and you're repairing things right the first time so that you're not having to make those reinvestments down the line. Jeff also talked about the value of inspecting your system and making sure that you know what's happening, putting on your galoshes and your slicker and getting out there in the rain and making sure that the system's functioning as you expect it to be functioning, because nothing's going to replace being able to see that firsthand. You can't just assume that your system's functioning as intended. And then if you've done that assessment and you've done those inspections, then you can begin to assess what's the most pressing need and what do we need to budget for it, and then what's the next most pressing need, and how can we do this over time so that we're not dealing with 17 different issues all at once when we have a storm. And as we all know, we can't prepare for Sandy, but we can prepare for those other storms that are becoming more frequent and more intense and are having impacts to your community. And then having things planned out over time and knowing exactly what things are going to cost you, it gives you the information that you need to make your plans defensible to your local elected officials. Whoever controls the purse strings in your community. If you have your stuff together and you can go to them and say, hey, we've been spending X to fix blowouts, but if we were spending this smaller amount over time, we could avoid having to deal with emergencies and catastrophe situations. Or at least minimize, I shouldn't say avoid, but at least minimize having to deal with catastrophe situations. And Chris touched on a lot of this as well already, the value of a green infrastructure approach. Being able to reduce implementation costs because you are taking that holistic vision and you are looking to address multiple community priorities at the same time. It makes a lot of sense from a resource management perspective. It makes a lot of sense from a financing perspective as well, because you're going to have those benefits that are addressing different community priorities. You're going to be making one investment that's going to address a number of community priorities, and that starts to resonate with decision makers as well. There are also opportunities when you use a green infrastructure approach to begin to engage the private sector. There's only so much you can do on public lands, right, to address these issues. At some point, you have to figure out how you're going to engage the private sector. And if you start to deal with something through policy mechanisms or through fee systems, not that fee systems are popular, but when you start to have policy mechanisms or fee systems in place, you can then start to offer carrots along with that stick to incentivize practices on private property. And then finally, we talked about we want to always be maximizing our return on investment, and we think green infrastructure is an opportunity to do that. And the data is out there to demonstrate that there are economic returns to communities in terms of economic development and revitalization when a green infrastructure approach is taken. I mean, it's the sheer aesthetics, property values increase, visitation to businesses in tree-lined streets is higher than visitation to businesses without trees. The data's out there. There is an economic benefit as well. And then finally, we heard a lot about this in the breakout sessions, and I feel like now I sound like the broken record, but I guess we knew what we were doing when we put this presentation together, because we hit on all these things that folks are talking about. From a financing perspective, regionalization, it just makes sense because it's going to create some efficiencies. As Kim indicated earlier, watersheds are pesky. They don't follow jurisdictional boundaries. They don't care about them. And so that's a challenge, but also an opportunity to be working collaboratively with neighbors, especially those of you that do have permits. It doesn't make sense for all of you to be managing your permits independently. It makes a lot more sense. It just doesn't make sense for this community to have an outreach plan, and this community to have an outreach plan, and this community to have an outreach plan, when you could be doing something regionally that's going to be more efficient and reduce the burden to any one of your individual municipalities. It's an opportunity to tap into the capacity. Maybe you don't have a street sweeper, but your neighbor does, or maybe the ditch cleaning equipment in your neighbor's community is better than yours, or you don't have what you need, or yours needs replacement. Being able to tap into capacities from your neighbors, from the nonprofit community, and from the academic institutions around is a real opportunity. And again, it's all about reducing the burden to any one municipality. And when I talk about regionalization, and I don't get to come up to New York very often, Chris doesn't invite me as much as I'd like, but it's in the region that I work in the Mid-Atlantic. Pennsylvania, I think, has a very similar governance structure where there's a lot of townships and boroughs and cities and you name it. And when I start to talk about regionalization, they get a little nervous because they think that I want to put all their money in one bank account, and they just kind of start to sweat and take a big step backwards. And I get that, believe me. I love my brother-in-law, but I would never want to share a bank account with him, so I get it. But I think what we like to try and point out to communities is there are a lot of opportunities for regionalization. Can mean a lot of things, and it can mean whatever that group of municipalities or communities need it to mean. And maybe it's just collaborating on outreach and education with a particular audience. Or maybe it starts to move, or maybe it's something like this today where we just have some peer-to-peer sharing. Maybe that's the first step. Maybe it's sharing equipment and tools and resources in some informal way. Or maybe that moves eventually to some sort of MOU between communities and some sort of shared regional entity, which could or would not have to necessarily involve shared financing. When we say regionalization, I just wanted to point out that there's a big spectrum of ways that can be applied to what you're addressing, and it doesn't have to mean, particularly for those of you who have to go back to your elected officials and sell them on some ideas. It doesn't have to mean something so formal and so. A level of sharing that might give them some heartburn. And so when we move out of getting costs down as low as we possibly can, and we implement some of these approaches to addressing our stormwater and green infrastructure and resiliency needs, there's typically cost reduction doesn't get you all the way there in terms of what you want to be able to accomplish on the ground. And so, there's going to have to be some revenue streams that are tapped into, and grants and loan programs are usually the first go-to, and that's great. I think they're a really important tool for being able to get maybe a demonstration project in the ground that becomes an outreach tool and an engagement tool, and so that your community can understand what you're talking about when you say, I need money to be able to put green infrastructure or stormwater practices on the ground. So those demonstration projects can be very valuable and can get a program up and running while you're trying to identify a more sustainable long-term revenue stream. You all are probably very familiar with bonding. It's tough to do in these times. We're seeing more of that, though, in terms of green practices. But honestly, at the end of the day, the grants are only going to get you so far, and you're going to have to think at some point about a sustainable, dedicated revenue stream. They're not popular when you first bring it up. Nobody wants another fee or another tax attached to their paycheck, and that's understandable. I don't necessarily want to be shelling out any more money either. But there's a very important outreach component, and I can't believe we didn't talk about outreach really anywhere in here between the two of us, but there's a very important outreach component. You may, if this is an avenue that you are interested in going down with your community, about figuring out how to put some sort of dedicated revenue stream in place, there's a really important outreach component that goes along with that, and that's outreach out to your citizenry as well as outreach up to your elected officials, because no one is going to be willing to invest in something they don't understand the value of. And one of the, we've been joking about the catastrophe tour that we've been on with the photos today, but those become very compelling stories for why when your elected officials, and I'm not trying to malign elected officials, they have a lot of responsibilities and a lot of audiences that they need to be accountable to. But when elected officials say something to the effect of, and I hear this quite a bit with the communities that I work in, we can't possibly afford to invest in these things. Well, I think the catastrophe tour this morning has demonstrated you really can't afford not to invest in these things. So don't underestimate the value of a really targeted outreach plan if you're going down the revenue stream development process. And a couple that are going on here locally. Ithaca stormwater fee just came online. They voted it in place last summer, just came online in January. The average property pays about $48 a year. If a property is significantly larger than the average size property, that property pays $48 for every average size lot on their average area of impervious surface. Residential unit. Did I not say that? No, sorry. Yes, residential unit. They're estimating they're going to be able to raise about $800,000 a year, and that's going to go directly into stormwater projects, stormwater management mitigation projects on the ground. And to make this a little more politically palatable, particularly for some of the properties that are large and have a very large impervious footprint, they do offer a credit for, and again, this is that idea of engaging the private sector, so private sector private sector entities that are willing to put, whether that be residents or whether that be some of the biggies here like Cornell and Walmart, if they're willing to put practices that manage stormwater on site, particularly green infrastructure practices are encouraged, then, and some of the practices that Chris ran through in his slides earlier, then they can get a credit of up to 20% off that fee. So that's one of the things that is commonly put into stormwater utility or stormwater authority programs to engage the private sector, but B, to sort of make the whole concept a little more politically palatable, that there is an option out. Over in Chautauqua County, there's a bed tax that was put in place a little over 10 years ago. It was originally 3%, recognizing that the water quality and water quantity management in the county was directly tied to being able to have economic development tourism dollars coming into the community. That 3%, they added an additional 2% in 2008, and that 2% goes directly to water resource projects, whether that be stream bank stabilization, whether that be other types of stormwater BMPs, living shorelines practices, and so that 2% is going right back into stormwater management in the community. It's going back out in terms of grants. They have a grant cycle every year. Pretty much everybody is eligible, whether that be public entities, whether that be private entities, whether that be even homeowners, even private property owners, individual private property owners are eligible to put in for these grants. And Chris, you have some good public-private partnership examples to talk about.
So yeah, I want to talk a little bit about public-private partnerships, and so some of these examples are just to get you thinking about what is palatable in our community and what could we maybe do. I like the idea of the bed tax, because the bed tax is really, people are coming to Chautauqua County, and generally speaking, because of the water resources. So if you're going to, so you have a bed tax to ensure the viability of those water resources. So public-private partnerships. This is in Syracuse. This is locally funded from my wastewater fee. As a city of Syracuse Onondaga County resident. So essentially this is a mini grant program to private property, nonprofits and businesses. If you want to get a new parking lot, if you want to put a green roof in, if you want to plant street trees, put in a rain garden or a bioswale to manage stormwater on site, the county will fund that project, that redevelopment, up to 100%. And up to 100% depends on a couple of different calculations. How much surface area are you managing? How much volume are you capturing? And how expensive is the practice that you're putting in? Porous asphalt's pretty cheap. Porous pavers are pretty expensive. The county's like, if you want the Cadillac, we're going to give you funding for a Chevrolet. If you want the Cadillac, you go and pay the extra. So since 2010, this has never been advertised because they didn't need to. 130 applications. This is old. 175 applications. 130 of those have been awarded, but local government being what it is, only about 83 of those have been completed. The others are under contract or waiting to be constructed this year. The snow has melted up there and the ground is soft, so we can start digging. So this is a big deal because we've been talking about how this is not just the municipality's problem, this is the landowner's problem too. Syracuse recognizes this. They can't manage the stormwater volume they need by only investing in public property. They need private investment, and this is their way to incentivize that private investment, to ensure that the private sector is helping the community at large meet our respective, collective goal of managing 250 million gallons of stormwater a year. This sounds like a lot of money. We're talking about $5 million. And for your communities, I'm sure for some of you that is a lot of money. For Syracuse, Onondaga County, population of 400,000, it's a lot of money, but it doesn't hurt too much. By the way, concurrent to this, we got a 25% rate hike on our wastewater fees. So instead of spending like $400 a year on drinking water and wastewater combined, I now spend $500. If they didn't tell me that they were raising my rates, I probably wouldn't have noticed. And that's a larger conversation about the water resources in the Northeast and how abundant they are and how we should treat them better. California, they're in deep water, and if you like almonds, you should buy them now. Oh, that was a funny joke, right? They're not in deep water at all. That wasn't very funny, actually. But yeah, seriously, go get some almonds. So a couple of examples. So this is, again, state money. This is a public facility, but it's operated and maintained at the benefit of the Syracuse Crunch. They invested, the sports team invested in this project, the state invested in this project, and so did the county. To capture stormwater off the roof to freeze it to make the ice that the Syracuse Crunch plays on. A couple of ancillary benefits that we didn't really expect is that the total suspended solids in the precipitation is different than that of the potable water, so it freezes faster. We use less energy to freeze it. We also use less energy to pump the potable water, and we use less money to pay for potable water to freeze it for a bunch of guys to beat each other up on. And the marketing aspect of this is pretty cool too, through the NHL and locally. Wow, we're skating on ice, on frozen rain. That's really nifty. I had mentioned this one as well. Again, state and private. The county didn't fund this at all, and the state funded a portion of it. And the institution, Syracuse University, a nonprofit that doesn't pay taxes and really doesn't necessarily have to care about its stormwater input or footprint in Syracuse, did this on their own. This is a really cool project. So this is a combination of several different pots of money. County money, because the county owns the sewers. City parks money, because they are in parks. And the Jim Boeheim Foundation, a private nonprofit foundation that builds courts for kids. It's called the Courts for Kids program, building basketball courts for inner city youth. So we took a little bit of Boeheim Foundation money, a little bit of parks money, and a little bit of county money to rebuild these basketball courts. So who benefits? The kids benefit, the parks benefit, and the county benefits, because this is porous asphalt, and it's managing water that's actually coming off the roof and infiltrating, road, and infiltrating below those basketball courts. They've built 5 of them in the city. So it can be done, and it's a feel-good too. Everyone feels good about these projects. It's like grandma and apple pie. You know, if you poo-pooed this project, there's probably something wrong with you. The connective corridor, this is a major multi-million-dollar project. This is state DOT reinvestment money given to Syracuse University. Syracuse University said, well, what are we going to do with this? And the chancellor at the time is like, let's invest in the community that hosts us, since we don't invest in it in many ways. So they're building the connective corridor. Phase 1 and Phase 2 are complete. Phase 3 is happening now. 25 million gallons of stormwater is being captured, which is great. And that's the county's benefit, and that's also the portion of this project the county's paying for. The university and the city also paid for components of this, as well as city parks, because there are parks along the connective corridor. But look at some of the other ancillary benefits. These folks are biking between downtown and Syracuse University. They want to bike 200 feet straight up a hill. I guess they've got some energy to burn off. But the cool thing about this bike infrastructure is it's curbed in. They're not going to get doored. They're not going to get run over. It's a safer area, wider pedestrian areas, new lighting that's attractive and functional, and new vegetation that wasn't there before. Before, this was asphalt from lot line to lot line, and there was no other benefit to this project or this area. There was no stormwater capture. There was no multi-use traffic, if you will. Binghamton, this is a nifty infographic that Jen Cotting, my colleague from Maryland, created. Essentially, they created a 50-50 stormwater fund to incentivize, using National Fish and Wildlife Foundation money through the Chesapeake Bay program, to fund 50% of some private projects, again, to incentivize private development by demonstrating to the developers that this is a good idea, and upping the ante by donating some public funds, as well as doing a residential program where they give money to residents to build rain gardens, rain barrels, and things like that. I think a few of you know about the Upper Susquehanna Coalition and the great work that they're doing with stream bank restoration, berm removal, reconnecting to the floodplains and wetlands that create storage for our floodwater. And so the takeaways are Jen's deal.
Well, and I think we've made these points pretty well, and I know we're getting pressed up towards 1 o'clock, so I don't need to read this slide for you, and we've talked about all of these points, but just the components of an effective financing strategy, and the benefits of taking green infrastructure and asset management and regionalization approaches from a financing perspective. And so when you go home and you pore over these slides, you'll have all of that information there as a reminder.
So the last few slides are really just to buy some time while they bring out the lunch. Not really. But so there are other tools and resources. We'll make all of these presentations available to you via some website or both websites, be it Sharon's and or ours. So you can look at them later. But the EFCs, particularly the EFC at Maryland, does a really great boot camp session where they come into your community, they sit down with you, they open up your books or your Excel sheet and say, how can we reduce cost and how can we create a plan, an implementation and a financing plan for different types of environmental infrastructure, not just stormwater and flooding. This is a great document if you are an insomniac. It's 160 pages long. It was created by the National Association of Flood and Stormwater Management Agencies, but there's a lot of great information in there. This is a better document if you are not an insomniac. It's only 6 pages long. It was created by the EPA Region 1, which is essentially New England. This breaks down in pretty straightforward, single syllable words about how to fund stormwater using different types of fees and credits and charges and incentives and other things. Going back to the Ithaca stormwater utility topic, in New York, we don't have enabling legislation for municipalities to create stormwater utilities. Ithaca, being what it does, doesn't necessarily like to obey authority, and so they're like, well, in the absence of prohibiting legislation, that means we can do it. Other folks think that in the absence of enabling legislation, it means you can't. But it's about time New York starts thinking about other ways to fund stormwater, because there are 21 other states in the country, and that's not more than half, but it's a significant number, already have enabling legislation for stormwater management using utilities. In New York, being as developed and as big and as infrastructure laden as we are, it seems like that time is ripe. Especially, frankly, now that we've gotten over the hydrofracking issue in the Senate, so maybe now they have time to think about some other environmental infrastructure thing like stormwater and flooding. Save the Rain. I mentioned Syracuse a few times. Check this out. We talk about how we fund it. Our construction specs are there. Our design specs are there. You want to see how much stormwater all these projects capture? Check it out. You have an engineer who would like to recreate those projects. Please recreate them. The county executive says, steal our projects, please. And so this is meant to be a resource to you, and as much or as little detail as you want is available at this website, savetherain.us. Onondaga County. And one quick note about this is that we're not talking about, in Onondaga County, about saving the rain anymore. As far as stormwater being the goal of putting in green infrastructure. We're thinking that maybe stormwater might be the ancillary benefit, the additional value, because as we're building these things, we're seeing a lot of other great things happening in the city. Some of it is coincidental, but it's certainly added value. And so savetherain.us, also operations and maintenance, big deal. We've got a whole guide on how to operate and maintain these things. So this is us. That's a great picture of me. Thank you, Jen, for scouring that from the website. Feel free to contact us. I'll stop talking. We're here for the rest of the day or the next several minutes, and it looks like lunch is now ready.